Coming up in all angles, trial by jury, a phrase we've heard for years. Why is it controversial now?
Our Privy Council has stated at least 20 years ago, albeit under the old or the previous Bill of Rights, that there is no constitutional right to a jury trial.
And with COVID affecting the courts, are jury trials on their way out the courtroom door? I'm Dion Jacksmill, and that whole issue of trial by jury is a fascinating one. It's yet another example of a whole bunch of lawyers looking at the same set of facts and laws and cases and coming to quite different conclusions. So we're going to be doing that starting with that in the second segment of the program. Before that, though, we did want to spend this first segment talking a little bit about the ruling of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions in relation to the Jodian Ferron matter, that there should be no criminal charges brought in this regard. And let me just remind you just very quickly of the facts. Thursday, April 23rd, Jodian Ferron was checked into Andrews Memorial Hospital to deliver a baby. She developed shortness of breath based on that and her oxygen levels. There were concerns that she had COVID. The hospital was concerned that they didn't have facilities to treat a COVID patient. They asked for her to be transferred to Victoria Jubilee. That said, no, we have no beds. They asked University Hospital of the West Indies. That said, well, we can't take her straight into our ICU. She would have to go to maternal first. The hospital said she could spend overnight and then be transferred to UWI. At the same time, a doctor from Andrews had said they weren't comfortable operating on her, doing a C-section on her there because they didn't have the facilities she would need after delivery. So Spanish Town agreed to take her, but there was some mix-up and she spent an hour and a half outside of the Spanish Town Hospital before being admitted. She was admitted, she delivered vaginally, and then she developed heart problem, was transferred to UWI, went into a special unit for COVID patients where she was being monitored electronically by cameras. But then that was when the problem emerged, because at some point the doctor was called at about 10:06 p.m. The doctor was called and told that they couldn't see the patient. She had gotten out of bed, unplugged her vitals. She was found slumped over the ventilator, unresponsive. She was put on the floor. Attempts made there to resuscitate her, which were unsuccessful, and she tragically died. So why no criminal charges in this? And Adley Duncan is with us, Acting Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions. Thank you so much for talking to us, Adley. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to be here.
The public has been outraged over this particular issue. They've been calling for blood. They've been saying this story does not add up. So many people seem to be at fault. Lock up somebody. Why have you guys at the Office of Director of Public Prosecution say not a matter for the criminal law?
Well, I, speaking for myself, think the case is outrageous. And I understand the immense public outcry because something like this should not happen in 2020 Jamaica. Yes, we understand that it was in the early stages of the pandemic when people were a lot more frightened than they are now. But I think everybody agrees, and my own personal feeling certainly, is that this is a particularly outrageous, terrible case. When it comes to my office deals with crimes. And for the viewers, everybody knows that, or they may not know, so I will tell the viewers, that when it comes to the court system, you have criminal matters and you have civil matters. And so a crime is an offense against the state. Historically, when we were colonies, it was called a breach of the king's peace or the queen's peace. So when you kill somebody, when you rape somebody, when you rob somebody, you're really interfering with the peace of the land. So it's an offense against the state. Whereas a civil matter is person and person. So if we have a contract and you break the contract and you owe me money, or you're my employer and I'm your employee, or I'm driving a car and I hit down somebody and I injure them, that is between two different persons. That's the civil arena. So our office is concerned with crimes. So if you kill somebody, the file will reach my office. If you rape somebody, the file will reach my office. So when it came to Jodian Ferron's case, there was a massive public outcry and there were questions about negligence. Could this death have been avoided Could this life have been saved? Were people at fault? And if people were at fault, by what standard, to what degree would they be found to be at fault, which is that criminal standard? So that's the background to everything. You have the criminal cases and you have the civil cases. Our job deals with assessing, was this a matter for the criminal court? How much time do I have, Dion?
About 7 minutes, maybe.
7 minutes. I won't take all of it. I will try to get into answering your question more directly about why there were no criminal charges.
No, the background is important, so sure.
Okay, happy to hear that. So, right, when it comes to the criminal standard and somebody dies, murder is not a case where you point a loaded gun at somebody's head and you pull the trigger and the person dies from a gunshot. That is a clear murder case. I don't think any doctor or nurse in this scenario wanted Jodian to die or intended for Jodian to die. So we are looking at a case of manslaughter. Manslaughter is where you may not intend for a person to die, but you do something unlawful and you do something dangerous, and as a result of that, somebody dies. And that's the general standard of criminal negligence. When it comes to medical negligence, there's a slightly nuanced or different standard. In fact, it's a very high standard, and I can't really say that I see many medical negligence prosecutions. Even in England, which is a much bigger population, I don't think there are many prosecutions brought there. I haven't heard of many. In fact, even the line of cases in this area of law is relatively scanty compared to more developed areas of law, because you don't really find many cases put forward for reasons I hope to explain. So when it comes to medical negligence, it's kind of a circular standard, but I will explain it. Basically, you owe a duty of care to somebody, and a doctor will owe a duty of care to a patient, right? There is loss as a result. There's a breach of the duty of care. So if something goes wrong, arguably there's a breach, fine. And there is loss because of that breach, and in this case, is the loss of life. So when we talk about medical negligence, there is one more dimension that the criminal law would have to find present if you're establishing a case in medical negligence. It is that doctors are trained people. They're skilled people. They go to school for a long time. We pay them a lot of money, though they are still underpaid, in the public service especially, but they work very hard. And we expect them to be diligent and competent. I think people understand that doctors often have to make decisions in less than ideal circumstances, and sometimes mistakes can be made. So the question is, at what point do you criminalize conduct? At what point do you penalize a doctor or other members of medical staff? So what the court has found in a case from 1924 called Bateman, you had another case called Bolam, and I think the most recent statement of the law is in a case called Adomako. These are all British cases. And basically what they're saying is that the negligence, the kind of negligence that you are seeing, it has to go past a compensation standard, because the civil thing is about compensation for loss or compensation for injury.
So that's civil, when I sue you, and if I'm successful, the court awards me damages.
Exactly. I have a contract with you, Dion, and you would never break a contract with me. So this is all hypothetical because you're a wonderful woman. But I have a contract with you and you break my contract and I am very upset and you owe me some money and I sue you. And the court finds that, yes, what Mr. Duncan is saying is true. Dion owed him some money. Then you pay me some money. That is civil. So what Bateman was saying, the criminal standard that we would have had to follow in deciding this case and the ruling is, did it go past a compensation threshold? Was it so bad that it showed such a disregard for life, such a disregard for the safety of the patient, that it should amount to an offense against the state and that morally it deserves punishment? That is the standard. So we would have to have identified somebody in this scenario who we know what the accepted standard of medical care is. We take that to be the case. We can find out what that is. And we would have had to establish that there is some individual in this scenario who departed so far from accepted medical standards that it is worthy of being called a crime and should be punished by the state.
I'm nearly out of time, but there are so many instances here that outrage the public. Her being found on the ground, we heard, and I saw in the ruling that the doctor said it was for resuscitation, but her coming out of the bed, apparently not being seen immediately, her having to wait. Right, her having to wait outside one hospital because it wasn't ready for her. There seem to be so many points at which problems occurred. Are you saying at none of those points what was their conduct that rose to the level of criminal negligence?
So I'll try to wrap it up and tie it together by saying the hospital, the private hospital, and then the state where the public hospitals were engaged definitely owed Jodian a duty of care. And it would, I'm not trying the case, it would appear that there was a breach of that duty of care and she lost her life as a result. So I don't think there is an issue when it comes to the state and the hospital satisfying their responsibility towards compensating for the losses based on breaches that would have or may have occurred. But in terms of rising to a threshold, we're not talking about a situation where the doctor cut open the wrong part and she died as a result. We're not talking about a situation where they gave her the wrong drug and it poisoned her and she died as a result. There was a lot of miscommunication, lack of coordination, panic, fear, distress, a lot of things went wrong. And in fact, I hope that internally the medical council looks at the conduct of some of these doctors to establish whether they act in perfect accordance with their licenses. But in terms of rising to a standard, which is what my office deals with, crimes, where you can go to prison, did it rise to a standard where any individual went far away from an expected standard of practice? And we could not say that any one doctor or any nurse departed from standards. Sure that they could have done things differently. There were problems with communication between hospitals and observing and following protocols. But those were not areas that would require the intervention of the criminal law. Those are issues that would affect her claim against perhaps Andrews, the private hospital, or the government hospital.
All right. Ada Duncan, thank you so much. I know you're going to be coming back a little later when we talk about trial by jury. So stay tuned, viewers. We'll be back. And remember, our hashtag is TVJ. All angles soon come.